Hey guys, thanks for joining us again today on Strange Dead Fellows. With me, as always, is Miss Lindsay Rutledge. Lindsay, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
I'm super. Mike is under the weather today, so he wouldn't be able to join, and he usually runs this part of it, so there could be some good bloopers. We'll see. Who knows?
So folks just have to deal with us today.
We're not inept. We're just not familiar, I think is the way to say it. But we're going to do our best because today we have a treat for you guys. We have a guest who is renowned for his work exploring near-death experiences, which began after he had his own. His fascination with the afterlife and his own experience led him to work with others who've had similar experiences and helped put his own story into greater context. He's a professional photographer. He's been called in to assist on multiple paranormal investigations while also having some experiences of his own. I'm super excited to talk with him. And would you all please help us welcome Mr. Alan Coefield. Hey, Alan.
Hey, how are we doing?
Hey, Alan.
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm happy to see both of you. And I'm sorry about Mike. I was looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah. He was looking forward to it.
He's making us drink from the fire hose with the software today, so we're running even.
Sure.
Well, hey, just to jump right into it, go off the deep end here. I was going to see if you wanted to kind of tell us a little bit about your own near-death experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of background story to it, which I'm going to do everything I can to keep it as short as possible. But I was born August 1st, 1964, at the Salvation Army Hospital in Birmingham, Alabama. During the medical procedure that's commonly done on male babies, on my second day alive, I bled out due to a high blood pressure issue, which I still have. And and according to state medical records, I was unresponsive for about 3.5 minutes. I have seen the records, so I know that event actually did happen. I've had memories my whole life of what I later found out was a near-death experience. Mm-hmm. And when I met my biological mother for the first time, because I was adopted when I was 4 months old. When I met my biological mother for the first time, I asked her about memories that I had that I thought maybe she would know something about, because my adoptive parents didn't know anything about it. And I told her what these memories were, and she confirmed to me that the memories that I was telling her that I had were identical. I was able to describe my hospital room, and I was able to describe the examining room next to the hospital room where the procedure was taking place. I could tell you what color the walls were painted, what they were made of, where the windows were, where the crib was. And she was confirming to me that actually what I was telling her was the hospital room that I was in. And so all this started coming to me when it started falling in place about a little less than 2 years ago, when I was doing some prayer and meditation and was talking to the Lord, and was, talking about various things that we usually, we'll talk about. And he kept putting these memories back in my mind, and I couldn't get away from them, and they were kind of distracting me. So I finally asked the Lord, why do you keep showing me this? And he told me, he said, what you have had these memories of over these years has been when you died when you were 2 days old. And he took me through all the memories that I have, and I was able to piece together everything that happened. Now, some people have like video reels of what their near-death experience was like. Mine is like part still pictures and part video clips. It doesn't all run together, but it's cut up in different places. And the first experience I had was, and when I first realized from my memories that something wasn't right, was my remembering what the hospital room looked like. But I remembered looking down on the hospital room, not looking at the hospital room from a crib like a 2-day-old baby would be looking at. And that's when I realized, okay, there was something different about this and what I'm seeing and experiencing. My next sensation was being covered by a blanket by a very beautiful lady, angel. I could feel the sensation of speed as we were leaving that hospital. Minutes later, what seemed like minutes later, the blanket comes off, and I'm in a room, kind of an oval room with white pillars in the middle of it. And even in my little 2-day-old mind, I look around the room and I see what I knew was Jesus. And he looks at the angel and he looks at me and he says, "Bring him to me." The angel does. He holds me on his left shoulder, which I'll come back to in a second because there's something kind of profound about that. But he holds me on his left shoulder, and I remember looking up at the side of his face, and I remember feeling his hands, and that my memory of that lasts for maybe 10, 15 seconds. My next memory is no longer being in that room, but being in a room a little ways away from there. And the room was kind of like 20 by 20, maybe in size. And one wall to my left was like our old railroad tunnel wall. And I was looking around, and I remember seeing two angels coming down a hallway to my right, which if I looked down that hallway, I could see Jesus, and that was the room where they first had me. The angels come in. One was a young boy, and one was a young girl. The young boy, he was there. He looked at me and we looked at each other, and he didn't really act like he cared much. Okay. But the young girl.
Just another guy.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go again. Another human here. But the young girl, she was totally enthralled with me. And obviously we spent some time playing, talking, laughing, whatever, because everything I did, every expression I had, she would just explode with laughter and explode with smiles. And it was, just amazing. So after a few minutes, she stands up and looks at me and says, "Okay, John, it's time to take you back to your body." What's interesting about the name John and them calling me John was I didn't get that name for 4 months. It was when my parents that raised me got me 4 months after I was born. That's when they gave me the name John. So it's as though heaven already knew what my name was going to be, and that's what I was being referred to as. Yeah. So that was that. That's the short version of the experience. Now,
notes.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned that Jesus was holding me on his left shoulder. Mm-hmm. When I was talking to my biological mother about my memories, I said I remember being held on her left shoulder, and I remember playing with hair and chewing on hair. And she said, "Yeah." She said, starting on day 3, because she says, after everything was normalized and I was put back in my crib in my room, I slept. And the next day, she said I was very uncomfortable. I was not happy. I was a cranky kid. Mm-hmm. And she said the only way that she could get me quiet was to hold me on her left shoulder, which obviously in my mind at the time, I was thinking, okay, I was comforted. I was secured. I was obviously healed or whatever on the left shoulder of Jesus. And then when I come back to earth, the only way I feel comfortable and happy or contented was to be held on my mother's left shoulder.
So like an imprint type of thing that you had that, and that's what you associated it with. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. That's, like I said, that's a short version of the near-death experience. Like I said, it started falling in place when the Lord started showing me the memories and showing me everything in context. Now, after I came to a realization that that's what it was, then I started asking all kinds of questions, such as, why did I come back? Why wasn't I allowed to stay? I have no idea. I know some people who have NDEs have the opportunity to decide if they stay or not. I didn't. Okay. And the big question that I had to face, and this is something I've helped a lot of people with who I've talked to with NDEs, was, okay, I have this knowledge now of where I've been, who's held me, and going through everything I did with my NDE. What do I do with it now? I mean, I'm 50 some odd years old, and I'm pretty solid in life. I'm happily married, and kids, grandkids, and all that stuff. But now it's like, what? Okay, there's got to be a purpose for this. Why at this point in life did I need to know what happened?
Right.
And so it took me a little while to try to piece it together through a whole lot of prayer and additional meditation and things like that. But it's all, I'm comfortable with it now. And that's one of the biggest questions that I run into with people who have had NDEs is they say, okay, I've seen the Lord, I've seen the afterlife, I've experienced the light and the energies and colors. And now I'm back here and I don't really want to be here. I want to be there. Okay. Now what do I do with it? And
right.
I wish I could say that everybody who has an NDE can answer that and get an answer to figure out how to blend that into their everyday life. I've talked to people who had NDEs 20, 25 years ago and they still haven't figured it out. So there are some challenges that can come from having had NDEs. There are issues sometimes with anxiety, depression. Quite a few marriages fail. Some bad stuff happens. So after a while, I began to think, maybe the Lord wants me to, because I've been pursuing ministry for so many years, maybe he wants me to go back toward ministry in helping people who have a problem adjusting to the fact that they've had NDEs. And that is where we started Royal Ministry. And that's where that has exploded in a positive way. It's exploded because now we can officially say with the associates that we're networking with, we have people helping us in other countries, such as Pastor Rod Walton in London. He's one of our big associates. We've been talking with somebody this past week from the Netherlands, and we of course have people across the United States as well. So that's pretty much the story on that.
That's incredible. And it's awesome that you guys have been able to branch out more, because with the studies of these things, there's common elements to near-death experiences for people.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's always some outliers of people who don't experience those typical kinds of things. And it's awesome that you've been able to create a place that people can go to who are struggling with those types of issues, because it's not, at least as far as I've ever heard, the place that you have with your ministry is the only place that I've heard directly for services for people who have had a near-death experience that are struggling with it.
Which to me is kind of, I've never thought about that until this conversation. And it's not something that the general public would even consider, like some sort of trauma, even though it's not trauma. Your PTSD is being here again, not there. So it's kind of a reverse situation with a very specific, we all assume combat vets could potentially have some mental health issues, some readjusting, whatever. But to think about the effects that something like that could have, that even someone with spirituality and science on their side might kind of shrug off. It's a big thing. I love that you're doing that.
I appreciate it. We, all the services that we provide, we do it free of charge. We're not in it for the money. Okay, we're in it for the blessing, and that's just the way we approach it. As far as the trauma goes, you're 100% right. But I would say there's three types of trauma that's involved with people who have had, some people who had NDEs. That's whatever the event was that caused them to be at the point of death, car accident, heart attack, whatever. So, when this whole episode is over with, that's one issue they got to take care of. That's why you have medical professionals to help, therapy and things of that nature. Then you have those who have an NDE and they come back and it's earth shattering to them. It's reality shattering because they may not have ever even realized it or even put thought into there being an afterlife. Right. And then there are those who are like you mentioned, they've come back, they've seen the afterlife, they didn't want to leave in the first place, and now they're having to learn how to deal with, the spiritual aspect of of having had an NDE here on earth. And the saddest part to me is a lot of people, and this is, I would say, the majority of people who have NDEs have a problem finding people they can talk to. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about it, a lot of people really don't want to talk to their family.
Yeah,
they will, and some will talk to the family, and sometimes the family will try to help. But it's even like my wife said to me. She said, I'm willing to listen to you anytime, but I've never had this, so I can't relate to it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have medical doctors that some of them are open to discussing it. Some of them will shut the door real quick. And then the worst part to me is a lot of the Christian community, specifically pastors. I've talked to people who have said they went to their pastor and said, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced. Can you help me to understand it? And they look them right in the face and say, that's not of God. No, we're not going to talk about that. So they want
interesting.
Yeah, denied evening. No, that's okay.
Lindsay and I had talked about that previously, about just reconciling every type of faith or even no faith at all into this bigger picture. Like, how does that work? Do you get a handful of people that don't really follow any kind of religious doctrine that come in and deal with that?
We do, and we're open to anybody who wants help. And please understand, we're only providing spiritual help. Okay, we're not. We also understand that there are things that behavioral wise that we're not qualified to help with. So we're more than happy to give referrals for that. And we're not qualified to help with the physical issues. But we understand not everybody who needs help is going to be a Christian. Right. Not everybody who has an NDE sees Jesus.
Yeah.
But everybody who has an NDE is a person, and they have a spirit, and something woke up. Something took them to a place that either they didn't know existed, or they thought it might exist, but it wasn't what they expected, or whatever. We're not. Again, I say, we're a Christian organization, but we're not going to require you to, become a Christian before we're going to talk to you. That's not. And
no baptism before help type thing.
No,
right.
Yeah. No, and I didn't think that at all. I think my question was more about I know I grew up in the church, regardless of where I am in my spiritual whatever journey I'm going through. I've always known that the church is, for the most part, most things is always there. So hearing you doing that and living it and accepting in, I've never doubted that type of thing. Mine was more about I guess, do they differ a lot from people who come in with faith with the NDE? Have you had people convert after they've had one?
Yes, we've had quite a few. Typically, though, if that happens, it happens before they talk to us. They come to the realization that, okay, I've heard about Jesus and God, but I never really, lived a life or pursued it or even thought about it. And then you have people who will come in and they'll see, great and mighty things, and be taken on tours of heaven and see their guardian angels and spirit guides and things of that nature. And when they come to us, that's one of the first questions they'll ask is, do I have to be a Christian to talk to you guys? No, you don't.
Yeah.
We're going to talk with you about what you saw, where you are, and where you want to go. And if there's something we can help you with, we're happy to do it. If it's not, then we'll help you find the right parties to go to. But
I love that.
Yeah, but if do the NDEs that we encounter with people have any commonalities with specific belief systems? Not really. We run every combination you can think of. We've had it, and we talk about it. We're prepared for that. The main thing, if we don't, as Christians, if we don't show them anything other than love and compassion, that's okay. That's okay. That's the main thing we want them to be able to take from us. Sometimes the best thing we can do is provide them a shoulder and an ear, and that's all they need. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. That's what we're here for. So.
And some validation too, because if, like you said, a lot of people have trouble talking to their families, or if if they didn't grow up in a religious family, like you said, there are people who convert before they come to you. I hadn't even really considered that, but for the people who grow up in a family with you're raised Lutheran or whatever, like I was, like to have that experience and then have that knowing that there's more, and Christianity is kind of the more common faith, at least in our country and everything. I can definitely understand why people would.
I think one reason why we can be so that we can work so well with all beliefs is because I've worked in ministry since the 80s, youth pastoring, associate pastoring, you name it, and I'll be the first one to say that Christianity is a man-made religion. Okay, it has its own belief structure. If it's man-made, then there's probably some issues along the way with it. Okay, God is not man-made. I asked somebody this question one time. I said, "Do you believe God is a Christian?" And they're like, "I never really thought about it." I said, "I kind of doubt it. Why would he need to be?" And even I amaze myself with questions I come up with every now and then. But anyway.
Well, I mean, you really think about it. It's like, why would he be what he wants us to be? Like, it's
right.
It's a very philosophical route you can go with it, but it is a deep question to make you really think.
Yeah, right. It's definitely one of those rabbit holes you can go down.
Yeah. And it's so that's the reason why we can be so open to working with people of all faiths, all belief systems, because it has more to do with the connection of the spirit and the well-being of the person itself. That's it.
Yeah, you're dealing with the soul and not the faith. Yeah.
Right. We also encounter a lot of people who come to us and say, "I've had my near-death experience. I've come to terms with it, but I have some things going on in me now that wasn't quite expecting to have happen." A lot of people come back with additional spiritual gifts. And even I didn't realize that I had the ones I have until after doing a lot of research with the things going on. I had seen these things in action, and I had experienced things related to the paranormal and other things. But I never really put two and two together. And the more people I talk to, the more people I realize that this is something that can be fairly common with people who have had near-death experiences, is they come back with the gift of in a way that I like to call spiritual sensitivity. Right. They're more sensitive to other spirits, heavenly messages. If you want to use the term psychic, mediums, and things of that nature, that's fine. But I think those terms are kind of limiting as to where some people actually have their abilities. And that's part of helping people learn how to come to terms with their experience, is saying, I've had people say, "Look, I grew up in a Christian home, and I was always taught that this is not right. This is not something I'm supposed to do. But yet this is something that's happening all the time. And I really didn't ask for it. What's going on?" And so we have to be very open to understanding where people are in that area.
Right.
And I'm not going to look at somebody and say, "You went to heaven, or you went to the afterlife, or wherever you felt like you went, and you now have come back with spiritual gifts, but they're not real." I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So we try to figure out.
It's a tough thing to reconcile, I'm sure.
It can be.
Especially if the faith or the way that you were raised, if they taught you that having those kinds of experiences are in some way evil, which unfortunately happens with some folks. So you found that you've had extra sensitivities after?
Yes.
Did you, after you had Jesus talk you through everything in the meditation with the near-death experience, you started to figure out things from your past as to it started to line up that you had these extra abilities or gifts?
Right. Yes, and actually I can see a progression of how they were awakened in me. Let me give you a perfect example.
Yeah.
In around 1990, I was pursuing ministry with a major denomination. And through the process of that, I figured out that this wasn't right for me. There was just something spiritually I was not connecting with that denomination. And it was kind of strange because it was the denomination I grew up with. It was the denomination my father was a pastor in. But I got to a point where I said, there's just something wrong with this. I can't fit into this. And so I was talking to a pastor friend of mine who was also in that denomination. And he told me, he said, well, you're just kind of going through a questioning phase, just pray about it and it'll sort itself out. And he said, but here's another place I want you to go to. And they might be able to work with you now as well. And he gave me the name of a interdenominational counseling ministry. And I went down and talked to them, and they were thrilled that I was there. They put me through some extra ministerial training and ordained me through their organization. This organization was a group of mainline denominational pastors who created a counseling service initially just for counseling other pastors, because it's one of the most stressful things a pastor can do, and sometimes they have burnout and they need somebody to go to, and this was giving them the opportunity. Mm-hmm. Well, that particular ministry had in their counseling service had grown to the point where they now were including what's commonly called Deliverance Ministry, and then there was counseling services with that. There was counseling services with people in drug and alcohol addictions, and you name it. The area that...
Can you explain what Deliverance Ministry is real quick? I'm not familiar with that.
And please understand, I'm conscious of the fact that we have, the listeners here right now are coming from all types of backgrounds.
Right. Yes.
And so, I'm being trying to choose my words very closely because I don't want to offend anybody.
Right. We understand. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, absolutely. And we're good. We're having an open conversation. Okay. I wouldn't sweat that too much. Have you heard me on some of these?
I'm sorry? Oh, yes.
Have you heard me? Oh, okay. So, I mean, don't worry too much.
Okay. Deliverance Ministry is typically a ministry for people who have been deeply involved in the occult and Satanism who want to come out of it.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Yeah.
And that's where, this goes on in churches all over the place, but these are more a lot of your hardcore churches. But the area that I was kind of taken into was in that area. But anyway, we worked with a lot of police agencies across Central and North Alabama, and we counseled a lot of, especially young ladies, who had been involved in Satanism. Some of which were very, there were a lot of manifestations that would take place. And typically somebody who's been involved in Satanism, usually they start out of curiosity and then they continue the path until they're in it before they realize it. And we've had young ladies that were what were called breeders. And these were young ladies who were used in some of the satanic rituals where sex was involved for the purpose of getting pregnant. And then when the baby's delivered, and the baby's used in ritual as well, and blood rituals. That gives you a little bit of an idea of how dark some of that was.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of trauma there.
A lot of trauma. and it was pretty tough on them. It was during that time period that a lot of my spiritual abilities came to the forefront, and I was able to see things, hear things, experience things that helped me with that area of ministry. And I stayed with that particular group for about 7 years. And then I started working in other areas of ministry where those were not necessarily needed or brought forth, but the gifts that I had continued. And they would continue sometimes at the most unexpected moments. Give you a perfect example. And I'm talking specifically about my sensitivity of the spirit realm. I had gone to Savannah, Georgia to do a photo shoot, and I was scouting out some locations. And right outside of Savannah, Georgia, you've got the marshes and the savannas, and then you've got the Savannah River, then you've got Tybee Island. And during the early 1900s, late 1800s, parts of Tybee Island was used as a colony for lepers and other people who were dying of diseases. They didn't have the space and the resources to take care of them. And they were in Savannah, they wanted to get them out in an area where, unfortunately, they would take them to this area, put them on a boat. They go about 100 yards over to Tybee Island, and they're there till they die. And right. you can imagine the horror, the terror, the sadness, the emotion that had to be going into those people at when those things were happening. Yes. Well, I went to Savannah.
To other people knowing that's coming for you too has just got to be
right.
An extra.
It's too much, yeah.
Well, I went to Savannah, and I had just come off of Tybee Island, crossed over the bridge, and I saw a little road off to my right, off to my left, and I thought, well, I'm going to, park down there and walk around because it was right there on the river, and I could see some shrimp boats go by and things like that. And I parked and walked about 50 yards to a pier that went out into the river and sat there and enjoyed myself. And I turned around to leave, and I got almost to the end of the pier. And for the first time in my life, I was gripped with overwhelming fear, to the point that the person I was with and myself, I just took off running as fast as I could. And I don't get scared. Okay, nothing scares me.
Mm-hmm.
That scared me. And I was trying to figure out, why am I scared? I don't see a gator following me. I don't see, any apparitions or anything around here. So I get in the truck. Yeah, I felt it. I mean, it was very, very strong. Well, that night I go out to eat, and I'm talking to this lady, and she worked at a bar right across directly on the other side of the Savannah River from where I was on that pier. And I asked her, I said, I had some weird things happen on that pier today. It kind of freaked me out. If there anything weird goes on in that area? And she goes, oh yeah. She said that was the drop off point for the people who were going to the island to live and later die on the colony. And she said, we have stuff happen there all the time.
Yeah.
So that was confirmation to me that, okay, I wasn't nuts. Well, that's sometimes still in question. Anyway,
it's relative,
right?
Yeah, and I'm enjoying it so far. So
but if you're happy, is it really nuts?
If you're happy, take your meds. But that was one example, and I can give you numerous examples of that. I've had. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you have some examples of when you were working with people of how those abilities helped you help them?
Yeah, I think one person I'm thinking about in particular that I talked to was an older gentleman, and his wife had passed on a couple of years before. And he told me that he said just before he had his heart attack, he kept seeing his wife around the house. And then when he had his heart attack, when the doctors were working on him in the ER, he really couldn't look around much, but he did kind of glance out of the corner of his eye, and he saw his wife standing in the corner. And then when he came home from being in the hospital, he still sees his wife like walking from one side of the hallway to the other, or he may hear her say something, and he says, "Am I going nuts?" And I said, "Actually, no. You're actually pretty much normal for some of the things that we hear other people talk about." And I said, "Why do you think she would come back and want to communicate with you or let you see her?" And he said, "Well, we were always very close, and she always joked about the fact that said, if I go before you, I'm going to come back and haunt you." And he said, "Come to think of it, that's just like her." And I said, I said, "There you go. I mean, that maybe not be the most dramatic of examples, but he seemed to have peace after that."
Yeah. And I mean, it's validation. And just from one of my own personal experiences, communicating with a friend's loved one who had passed on, the second time that I had talked to him, because first he was just kind of overwhelmed with the whole situation that he was gone. But then after things had set in a bit more, his demeanor changed this soul, and he realized that he could screw with his family. Mm-hmm. He thought it was pretty funny.
Right.
And so that means
that makes perfect sense. I mean,
I have prank and goof around in life. I mean, chances are.
I know I had someone I was very close to that passed away about 8 years ago. And her nickname for me was Cutie.
Cutie.
Just C-U-T-I-E. And she says, "Hey, Cutie, how are you, Cutie? You need to call me more Cutie," or whatever. Well, she passed away. And one day I was in the backyard and doing some yard work or whatever. And I heard 3 birds land on a branch up above my head. And all 3 of them were saying, "Cutie, Cutie, Cutie."
Oh, no way.
I'm like, okay. Yeah. This one's pretty obvious. Okay. And I'm like, if she could have done anything to come back and manifest herself in my life in some way, she chose that. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So it makes sense if that's the key word, that would be that's her.
Right.
It's funny that you had that experience, because I had one that's almost identical. I know I told Lindsay about it when it happened. I had a friend of mine passed. It's been 1.5 years. We're the same age. Went through school together. That we met when we were 12 in 7th grade and became close friends. Played football together, and he gave me a nickname. And I had that nickname for a couple of years with football. It wasn't anything crazy. And he was the only person that continued to call me that into adulthood. I don't know that I ever heard Keith ever again. Most people call me Cookie because of my last name, Cookus. That's the way it typically goes. Only one other person really called me that nickname, and it was my ex-wife. When she found out that was the nickname he gave me, she loved it. And I was doing a pickup for, I don't remember, do you remember if it was groceries or Target? It was one of the two when I told you about this. And the guy, I'd never met this guy before. Random, 20-year age gap.
Oh, and
he goes, "All right, sir, is there anything else I can do for you?" I was like, "No, thanks so much, man." He goes, "All right, thanks, Mr. Biscuit." And he walks off. And Biscuit was the name that my friend had called me. And it just stuck. Did I hear that? I know he didn't call me that, and I don't have it on anything.
He messaged me and told me, and I was like, that was definitely.
But it wasn't like I misunderstood him. It came as clear as day. And it threw me through a loop. So knowing that you had something similar to that is, again, that's some validation for me, and knowing that I'm not completely gone.
No.
Right.
That makes sense. No, I've had the ability in my life to understand things about people. But in a ministerial sense, I don't volunteer that information to them because,
Right.
if I'm talking to someone who's had some kind of trauma, some type of earth-shattering issue go on, and I come up and start giving them details about things that they don't know I know about, that's going to throw
it can be scary.
Yeah. But there are times where I will sit next to somebody or talk to somebody on the internet or whatever, and I'll say to myself, this person is about to tell me this. And I believe that's a gift, part of my spiritual sensitivity that is given to me for the purpose of using in ministry.
Right.
And I'm talking about me, but at the same time, I believe everybody has the ability to have spiritual sensitivity. It's just in some situations we have to try to find ways to open up to it.
And to kind of develop it a little bit. Whenever I talk to people about stuff like that, I always just use the example of folks who are just born with like natural athletic ability, whereas others, they like really have to practice. And it's kind of the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know for a while I got out of ministry. I've been working as a commercial photographer for 84 years now, I think. No return for me. And
how did you develop on 10?
What's that?
How did you develop on 10?
I don't know. But even in what I was doing in photography, that would come into play. My spiritual sensitivity would come into play in my being able to pick up on what we commonly call the paranormal. One particular example was around 2003 or 2004. I was hired to go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and take some photos from advertising. Okay. You may know.
Born in Little Rock. Well, I'm born in Little Rock, live in Fayetteville. So.
Okay. Well, you may be familiar with the Majestic and Arlington hotels.
Absolutely.
Well, I was hired to go to the Majestic and the Arlington, but I actually spent more time at the Majestic doing some advertising and promotional photos for the hotel. I want to be there for a week so I can stay around there long enough to get the feel of the place, which if you've seen the place, you know what they mean by getting the feel of the place. And so the first day I was there, I was, doing photos, just, giving free run of the place to go wherever I wanted to shoot. And the manager came up to me and he said, "Would you mind doing a few extra things for me?" And I said, "Well, sure. What do you mean?" He said, "This hotel is very haunted."
You got right to it. Yeah.
And he said, "We'd like to capture something on film." Of course, this was back when I was shooting film. And I said, "Well, yeah, I'll be happy to. Just kind of give me a little bit of insight and let me know." And the only thing he told me was, he said, when you walk in the front door of the Majestic, the counter was off to the right, and in front of you was like fancy wood wall, staircase a little bit to the right, elevators were to the right, but there was one elevator that was kind of built into the wall to the left of the staircase that most people didn't even know about. And he told me, he said, that elevator was the one that would go to the owner's floor, and the only people who used it were the owners and his staff. Okay. I said, "Are they there now?" He said, "Oh no, they died 20 years ago." I said, "Okay." He said, "If you hear anything or you see anything going on in that elevator, that's probably a hint that there's something going on." Okay. So the next morning I get up and I go down to the lobby and I'm just kind of focusing on that elevator. And about 8:15, the elevator door opens. I grab a camera, rattle off a few shots. Don't see anything. Nobody's there. Walked over to the counter and I asked the lady behind the counter. She said, "Well, those elevators are not supposed to work, but they do on their own periodically. Nobody ever uses them." I said, "Okay." She said, "You're that photographer, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, Just wait a few minutes. You'll see what I'm talking about. Okay. So I go back over to my seat and I wait. About 15, 20 minutes later, the entire lobby fills up with the smell of flowers. I mean, I don't mean like it was a flower off in the distance. I mean like it was a massive.
Like you're in a meadow.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The elevator door opens again, and then it closes. And I look over at the girl at the counter, and she's giggling. Okay, you got to tell me the story on this. And she said, well, when they first built the hotel, all the way up to the point that the owner's wife passed away, every morning she would get up, go down the elevator, go down the elevator, go across the street to the florist, get flowers for their room, come back, take the elevator back up. Okay, neat story. I took pictures of all this that was going on, got the film processed, and I saw some of the biggest orbs you've ever seen in your life right there in the middle of the elevator.
Really?
And you had that. You also had the fourth floor of the hotel that they did not book anybody on ever, because everybody who would be booked on that floor would be awakened in the middle of the night and scared to death, so they had to move into a different room.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a lot more, but the more I stayed at that hotel, the more I was able to feel certain things. I got access to that fourth floor, and as soon as I walked off the elevator onto the fourth floor, it was like somebody poured a cup of blood in my mouth. I could taste it, like
just like that copper.
Yeah.
Wow. And the story behind that was that for a long time, Hot Springs, Arkansas was a hot spot for members of the mob. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of murders that went on in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Mm. And they loved to stay on the fourth floor. A lot of murders went on the fourth floor.
Ah, okay.
No,
the bosses like to be on the fourth floor.
Right. So
Hot Springs, especially during like the Prohibition time, that era, mm-hmm. It was, and that's why Oaklawn's still there, the horse racing. But I mean, it's known for, that's the history of Hot Springs, a big part of it.
Right. You know, if you walk out the front door of the Majestic and walk take a right and walk down a couple of blocks, there's like a bunch of shops in that area. Then mm-hmm. just down the street, across the street, but on your left would be the Arlington. And I took a lot of photos around that area as well. And practically every photo had orbs in it. And you knew when you walked around that this area was just amazingly active. You could feel the electricity in the air anywhere you went in that area.
Now, going on to your spirituality side of it and then the scientific mm-hmm. side of it, a lot of spiritual energy and activity seems to be heightened in areas where you have hot springs, that type of thing. Like Eureka Springs up here in the northern part of the state. We have the Crescent Hotel. It's the same mm-hmm. lots of limestone, lots of natural springs, right. things like that as conduits for it. I mean, are you with the faith side that you look at and the scientific, like, do those coexist for you for the most part? Or is it more of a, if I'm getting too personal, I'm just curious.
No, that's a great question. My initial response in picking up on things is spiritual. Now, if I'm working with people who are doing investigations, sometimes I will ask those questions about, okay, have you done a geology test on the area? Right. Because, we know you have limestones and cracks in rock formations and you name it, that can lend themselves to either paranormal activity or natural things that mirror paranormal activity. So that is finding out the things like you're talking about usually comes a few steps later for me. It's usually picking up on it initially is what happens with me.
Right. But I mean, have you found that a lot of those coincide, I guess is what I'm.
Yeah. Does it seem to ring true to you that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it does. I mean, which kind of takes me to, I've had the joy of touring every major Civil War battlefield up and down the East Coast. And where I lived in Atlanta for many years, I lived about a mile from the Kennesaw battlefield and about 2 miles from Cheatham Hill battlefield. Mm-hmm. And there were times where I would go into the battlefield and just walk and say, okay, I'm going to see if I pick up on something. And if I picked up on any form of energy whatsoever, I would turn to that area and just take a photo of it.
That's a good way to test yourself too. When you said you would just go to these places and walk through them and see what you felt, because then that helps you to learn how your body responds to those kinds of things. So you get more accustomed to what signs your body's trying to tell you. And then it helps you learn to trust yourself, to trust that knowing that you get. That's a good way to test yourself. And
it's almost like reverse Pavlovian type of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you'll listen to us, then we'll give you the reward.
Yeah.
It's one thing to know that you have spiritual gifts and spiritual abilities. It's another thing to get the confirmation of it.
Yes.
When you get those confirmations, that's when you say, okay, now I have confidence in these things.
Right. It's huge. Oh, it's so important. Because we're taught that there are logical explanations for things, and that we have to find. It's almost like it's not okay to not know, or to be sure about stuff. But I think it's cool that more and more people are kind of learning that it's okay to not know and to kind of be curious about it and try to figure it out.
That is not always scary.
No, right. No. I don't have to have an opinion on everything. Number one. And number two, it's okay for me to say, I don't know.
Yes.
And if we're really honest with ourselves, I don't care if we're talking about, spiritual sensitivity, spiritual gifts, why some people see certain things in NDEs and don't see it in others and things like that. We don't really know a lot of the answers to it.
Right.
We can apply a lot of theories to it. And sometimes, the spirits do give us the answer. But it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't understand why this is happening. But don't beat yourself up if you have that.
Right.
Just experience it and try to make the best sense of it you can, but you don't have to have an absolute answer.
No.
Right.
And that's one of the problems that some of these NDE people that I talk to have is they want to try to fit it into a box. Okay. I have this ability. I don't know why it's happening. What do I do with it?
Yeah. Something that I've learned that's been really helpful for me, at least, is because sometimes when we're shown things or told things by our guides or whatever experience it is that we're having, sometimes it's not meant to make sense right then, but just like make a record of it and write it down and be okay with it. And maybe go back to it later because it'll make sense in the future. Like it's not to make sense now, but down the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a vision one time of a blue check with black ink for $5,000. Very clear in my brain.
Very clear in my brain, but my mood. My mood and my team have trouble.
This is hey, welcome to Alan Crease, new word today. But it was very, very, very vivid in my mind. I got that one right. Yeah. And within 10 days, I was holding a blue check with black ink for $5,000.
Yeah.
Why would I need to have seen that? I don't know.
Yeah. But sometimes they just show you shit and you're just like, okay.
And there are things that will come to me about people that, again, I'm not going to volunteer things, to people unless they ask, because I think that's kind of rude. But if I'm told something about somebody, and I'm not going to forget it, I'm going to hold on to it because there may come a reason later that I need to. And it may not be something that I need to tell them. It may be something I need to know in order to help them later with it. So, there's a whole multitude of reasons.
Reasons to write that stuff down because it could apply in so many ways later on.
Well, I actually had the blue check was one of the things I was going to ask you about, and the other one was a girl in Missouri, 5-year-old.
Oh, yes. This was part of my family with my ex. The family in Missouri had they had a good friend. Actually my father-in-law, former father-in-law, worked on the railroad. He had a great friend that worked on the railroad with him, and he married a lady, and they had a baby. Not long after the baby was born, maybe like a year or two, maybe 3 years afterwards, she got very, very sick, and she died. And that night, they were at the funeral home for the visitation. The women in the family were talking amongst themselves, and they said, okay, this lady who died, she had some jewelry that she had left in the upper drawer of her chest. And we think that her little girl would want that. So when we go home, let's get that and give it to her and let her know we're sure that her mother would want her to have that. So they go over to the little girl who's there at the funeral home as well. And they said, honey, I know you're young, you're not really understanding all that's going on, but there's something that we know your mother wants you to have. And the little girl looks at him and goes, yes, it's her jewelry. And they looked at each other like, okay, okay. She goes, yeah, she came to me today and told me it's in her top drawer of her dresser. And they got home and looked, and that's where it was. And they asked her, they said, how did you know this? And her response was, well, this morning before we came to the funeral home, my mama came in my room and set me on her knee and was telling me all kinds of things. And that's one of the things she told me. If that doesn't give you chills. Exactly.
I just love that stuff.
And when you hear of these things happening, and then you think of the people who want to say, well, that doesn't really exist. Don't take that joy away. Okay. Mm-hmm. That person is still interacting with their loved ones. The loved one is grieving. They may be, sorrowful, anxious, whatever, but they had that moment with a loved one that passed away. Don't take that away from them.
Oh,
don't try to put any kind of negative connotation on it, because it may not fit in your box, but it did theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what we're trying to help people to understand is, when you have these events like this, when you have, for the lack of a better way of putting it, the psychic knowledge of things, mediumship skills, whatever the case may be, it's okay to feel that. Okay to go with it. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to realize that because of your NDE, more than likely that was imparted to you to come back and use for a reason. It may be for the rest of your life. It may just be for a couple of weeks. Who knows? But don't be shamed for it. Go ahead and accept it and operate within it and be at peace.
Oh, I love that. I'm like crying. That's so ridiculous. But
it is. It's a great message, though.
Yeah, it is. It's an important one that a lot of people need to hear, I think.
Right. Reality, too, is that I think there was some surveys done recently that said, I think the Pew Foundation did some surveys of mainly Christians, and they asked them, and they said, how many Christians do they believe in ghosts? And they said 60% came back and said yes. Mm-hmm. 18% came back and said that they have actually had some encounter with it. If that many people are having positive encounters with ghosts, if you want to call it that, the spirits or spiritual sensitivity or whatever, maybe we need to pay more attention to it. And let me throw this in there too also. If you don't have experiences like that, that doesn't mean you're any less of a person, doesn't mean you're any less of a spirit.
Oh yeah, absolutely too.
I mean, if people who don't experience Jesus or don't really experience what we would commonly call heaven in an NDE, that doesn't make their NDE any less valid.
Right.
I heard somebody say not too long ago that what you experience is what your spirit needed to see at that moment.
Absolutely.
So, it might be your spirit maybe needed to see Jesus. It maybe needed to spend time with your spirit guide or your guardian angel or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the same thing goes for spiritual gifts. If you have them or you're spiritually sensitive, there's a reason for it. Now, you don't have to go, looking to figure out why. It'll come to you when it's supposed to.
And talking about the different experiences, this is off of our little outline we had, but it's very relevant. There was, I forget his name, but there's a gentleman who talked about an NDE he had where it was, I believe it was like 23 minutes in hell or something like that. I don't know if you've heard about.
I've seen the book. I might have listened to it, but I'm not really.
Do you have any experiences like that you help people through? Like horrible, I didn't go where I was thinking I was going to go?
I haven't myself now.
Okay.
I'm aware of the fact that some people may experience that. Mm-hmm. I've heard enough stories to where I believe that might be happening for some people. Why it does for some people, I don't know. A lot of people who go to what we call heaven will come back and say, when they went through their life review, there was no judgment. Mm-hmm. But yet some people say as soon as they passed, they felt themselves falling and they ended up in basically what would be called hell. I really don't have an explanation for that. I don't understand. Right. We as Christians believe that if you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you don't have to worry about hell.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But obviously, again, if that's something they went to, there may be a reason they needed to go there. And it may not have been to torture at that moment. It may have been to wake them up or to correct something. Yeah. Or maybe put them in touch with the fact that there's, for every positive energy, there's negative energy, or however you want to look at it.
Whatever sort of lesson was meant to be learned, kind of thing. Right. And actually, for folks watching, Mike and I actually interviewed Alan last year for another project and talked about near-death experiences. So I did a whole bunch of research and stuff, and it could be that a reason why you haven't had many people come to you with those stories is because, at least from the research I did, a lot of people don't want to admit that that's what their near-death experience was, because mm-hmm. they feel ashamed that like that makes them a bad person or something. Right. Like I went to the bad place or whatever, and so people are less likely to reach out for that stuff because of the fear of judgment and stuff.
And this also goes back to people who ask me, so when you were 2 days old, how do you remember any of this? During my awakening with the Lord, he told me that what you remember from your near-death experience is what you remember from your spirit remembering, not your physical mind. Mm. Okay, so that gives you an example of that. Now, somewhere in there could also be the fact that, and I have heard of this on a couple of occasions, people who died and went to hell, and it was witnessed because as they were entering hell, they still had enough of their physical in their physical body to be reacting to it. And they were telling the doctors, they were telling the nurses, don't let me go here. I'm burning. Don't let me go here and whatnot. Oh, wow. And as soon as the NDE was over, they had no memory of it. And it could be that it was so horrible, their mind would not allow them to be able to bring that back. Whether it's their spirit mind or their earthly mind.
Right. Because then all sorts of theories can come into place if it's whether your soul feels that that's something you're not supposed to remember or really necessarily know about yet, or is that the human brain trying to protect you from trauma, like for people who forget traumatic events from childhood or whatever, things like that. And actually, I remember you had brought this up in one of our messages. Could you tell us about the studies being done at the University of Virginia in regards to the topic of NDEs and people having gifts afterwards?
First of all, I'll start off by saying the University of Virginia has done a amazing job in doing research into NDE.
Yes, they have.
I know, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe Dr. Grayson, who created the Grayson scale, he's a part of it, and numerous others. But I think
came across a lot of him in my research when we interviewed you. So I know University of Virginia is big with that.
Yeah, he is one gentleman I would really like to sit down and pick his brain.
Right? Yeah.
But it appears that they've kind of moved, after reaching whatever conclusions they've reached with their research, they've moved to the area of what we're talking about, and that is people who have had near-death experiences who have come back spiritually sensitive, whether they are spiritually sensitive in psychic abilities, mediumship abilities, seeing the paranormal, experiencing the paranormal, or whatever. What they're trying to do is they're going through the questionnaire phase right now, and they're going to be bringing people in for lab research later. They're wanting to, and they could explain this better than I could, but they're wanting to study the human brain in ways to where when these things are going on, they understand what the brain is doing.
Oh, okay.
And there is I think if I didn't send it to you, I'll send it to you later. There's a link you can go to online to do the questionnaire that will explain a whole lot more about the research that's going on. Which is going to be
awesome.
Yeah, you can put that in here for anyone who watches if they have had one and they're interested.
I'll send you what I've got. It's kind of funny that I found out about that, because when I finally came to the realization that, yes, coming back being spiritually sensitive after having an NDE is more common than most people are even talking about. I'm like, that's something I need to look into, because, I've got people that I'm talking to who are telling me these things, and I need to know more about it as well. And it wasn't 2 hours later that I found out about the University of Virginia study. And I'm like, okay, how far behind am I on this now?
No, your guides, they took you right there and were like, you need to know, here you go.
And I thought, okay, well, that and I also viewed it as initially I viewed that as my confirmation that yes, this is something that is going on, that is a bigger picture than even I know.
So when they're looking at what's happening with the brain with this, do you mean like they're going to try to look at the brain while people are actually experiencing their gifts?
From what I gather, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And I could be slightly mistaken on that, but I believe that's what.
Yeah, well, I'll have to look closer.
Yeah. And you know what? My mom was an EEG tech for years, and I'm curious to kind of ask her about some of the information in there too, to see, because I know we'd spoken at one point about how our brain, there's different wavelengths. I believe it's like alpha, beta, theta. I'm not sure which one it was, but there's one that our brain gets to when we're still in that realm between wake and sleep. And that's where a lot of people's brain waves, they can like literally allow themselves to get to that state for a lot of the gifts that people have.
Or like
I'd
be curious
and stuff.
Exactly. And I'd be curious to see how that lines up with some of that too. Just
exactly. And I think that's the goal of what they're doing,
that was really interesting.
Which kind of, takes me, I know this is way off the topic, but it kind of made me think here for a second. A lot of the people who are skeptic of NDEs will say, particularly if it happens at a hospital, well, it was the medication they were on, or it was the brain releases a chemical of endorphins, and all of a sudden you see unicorns and mushrooms growing in a field. But what they don't take into effect, and this is something that these guys from the University of Virginia came to the realization of, is that at the moment these people had passed and had their NDEs, there was no brain activity going on.
Yep. I was just going to say, I researched that stuff too. Yep.
So there was no way that a chemical or a drug or anything like that would be influencing what they were seeing and experiencing, because the brain, being that the brain had shut down, there was no way for them to create the memories. Okay, where were those memories coming from that they have? Spiritual memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that would be. I'm anxious to see what they come up with. Also,
that'll be really interesting. I'm
I
excited
love it
to
when
see what happens.
Science can validate anything like that. It's one of my favorite things to see. Just even there's a program on something on National Geographic where it talks about it'll take a certain area and it drains all the water from it. So they've done one with the Titanic to kind of go over like how it sunk and things of that nature. And it's the same type of thing where the science and the technology and everything starts to catch up to previous events, just like it can with spirituality. Like some people don't think the two can coexist or one outweighs the other, but it's all part of the same thing. And you just get more validation from the explanation.
Right.
Not a disproving of either one.
No. Yeah. And I know a lot of times in Christianity, there is a battle that goes on between the scientific world and the Christian world or the spiritual world. Mm-hmm. And I think that when things happen, one or the other will validate the other.
Mm-hmm.
Saying if. And that validation may be immediate. It might be centuries later. Mm-hmm. So we have to be patient with it. But it is fascinating when those happen. And that was like with me when I was, after the Lord took me through the awakening and showed me how all these memories I had over these years came together as bits and pieces of my near-death experience. Even after that, I still went and did my own investigation. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about science is a lot of times science is going to confirm what God has done.
Yeah, and science is catching and validating things more and more all the time. And it's really exciting, especially with physics. Like, I don't know. That's a whole other thing to
I know I was
involved with, but man. And when you're talking about the science and everything, it's like, that's always a good thing to remind people as well. Like, one thing that it makes me think of is an earlier episode we did was on cryptids, and I thought it would be fun to see if there were animals that we're plenty familiar with now that had been on the cryptids list, were believed to be like kind of mythical creatures and stuff. And it was like rhinoceros, giraffes, kangaroo
was one.
Yeah. And so for us now, it's like those are very well-known animals, but you go back far enough and there's written descriptions of it's like these creatures with claws and man-like whatever. And it's like some things need a little time and then we'll understand them better.
Oh, I know. There's a book out called Close Encounters of the God Kind by a televangelist, Jesse Duplantis. I'll leave people's opinion about him, that's whatever their opinion is, go with it. But he had an out-of-body experience, and for some reason we're stuck in Arkansas tonight because he was staying at a hotel in Magnolia, Arkansas, which I stayed in that hotel. So when I heard this story for the first time, I'm like, I know what he's talking about. But he had an out-of-body experience where he was taken to heaven. And one of the things he talks about was he gets there and he starts seeing things around him. And one of the things he saw were a lot of the animals that we have here on earth are also in heaven. And there are a lot of animals that are in heaven that we don't have here. And it was fascinating to hear that.
And to think about all the animals too. I mean, that can, I mean, there's plenty of people. I grew up, I don't want to say grew up, but once I was double digit age, you know, you start hearing, well, animals don't have souls and that's why we can eat them and blah, blah. And it just, there's this, it's almost like some of that can just be used to get you from having a weird conversation sometimes, but then to know, like, to hear about someone having an experience, regardless of what you think about that person on the scale, but that the animals are up there, that gives you a different perspective on things too.
Yeah. And actually, when you were talking about this guy's experience where he saw animals that were here and animals that we didn't have, I've read a lot of books. I'm fascinated by past life regression and things like that. And in some of those where people, this book specifically that talks where the hypnotherapist accidentally got them into the in-between of the lives. That there were people who had mentioned that they saw animals they recognized and animals that they didn't recognize too. So I was just like, that's another thing.
Wow.
It's just fascinating.
It is.
Edgar Casey talked about that too, I think.
Really?
Have you heard of Edward Casey Allen?
I've heard of him, but I haven't heard him now.
It's interesting to read up on him too. He was able to get himself there very easily. He was not a smart man at all, but he had some kind of gift. It's hard to even explain.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. I hope the things I said can be of a benefit to people in some way.
Oh,
no, absolutely. If it does something for one person, you've done. I mean, that's the way I always look at it.
You know, I think one thing I would want to say in closing is that, you know, anybody who's gone through anything like we've been talking about, you know, don't be ashamed. Don't be shy about what you've got. You know, if you have spiritual sensitivity to any degree, if you have experience from NDE or whatever, you have that for a reason. And it may take you a while to find out what that reason is. It may be for you, it may be for somebody else. But, you know, just be, you know, approach everybody with love and compassion. You know, if you, when you read the Bible and you read about every miracle that Jesus did, the first words that are in the Bible prior to him talking about healing or giving somebody a healing or a miracle was, he was moved with compassion. That should be an example for us. It fascinates me.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Absolutely.
All right, Alan. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Well, thank you too as well. It's always a joy. Always a joy.
It's been a great talk. And before we say goodbye, can you tell our viewers where they can find you and your work or your practice, your services online?
Our website is royalministry.net, and we're also on Facebook. We've also started another organization that is very, very much on the ground floor. This is starting off very slowly, called the Christian Center for Near-Death Research, or Christian Center for Near-Death Resources. Big words.
Oh, okay, cool.
And
all those syllables.
Yeah, well, actually, it's facebook.com/CCDR, I think.
Yeah, you're like, whatever that breaks down to.
Right. DR 549 something. But if you know, just if you put in Royal Ministry, Birmingham, Alabama, on Facebook or royalministry.net, you should be able to find us pretty easily.
Okay, cool. And we'll put the links below in the info for everyone as well. So awesome. On behalf of Keith and Mike, who wishes he was here, and myself, we thank all of you guys for hanging out with us tonight, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.